Yeah, okay. Hi friends, so we're back again. Sometimes we don't do a live stream for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then suddenly we're doing one every day. So that's just how we are. So, with Dee Dee and myself, Dee Dee's going to do most of the talking. This is one of her many areas of expertise, and we wanted to talk about a recent article in The Guardian, well, actually around that article, which was about Judith Butler, who's basically the mother of gender diversity. She's sort of, she's an academic gender diversity, and she's very influential, also a supporter of Palestinian issues. And just before we go on, I just want to check and make sure, because it's alive and we don't have anybody assisting us, I just want to make sure it sounds like well, my level's okay. We'll see what happens later when Dee Dee drops in. But, oh, here's Holly. Hi, Holly, how are you? We're back again. We didn't yammer enough for 3 hours last night, so we had to do some more yammering. And so anyway, Judith Butler, she was criticizing, in an article in The Guardian, part of her interview, she was criticizing trans-exclusive radical feminists. We prefer to call them just transphobic people. But she was criticizing them because basically they're hooking up with the far right. You know, they actually got the Proud Boys to help them out in a demonstration. And so Dee Dee's going to talk about this article, and she'll probably read some of it and then give some commentary, and I might pipe in occasionally if I have anything to say. So anyway, Dee Dee, I'm doing well, thanks. Holly, how are you? So anyway, so Dee Dee's going to, Dee Dee might start off. And which article are we looking at first? We're looking at FAIR article. Okay, and that's on screen at the moment, so you might want to start that off, Dee Dee.
Okay. Now, I'll just say first, FAIR is an organization that has been around for a long time, since 1986, as it says there, and it's been criticizing media bias.
Have you got your microphone turned on?
I think so.
You might want to start that again. Because oh, hang on. I'm not sure if I can. Wait a minute. Just let me just make sure for a second. Let me just make sure that Dee Dee's got some levels. Anyway, keep talking, Dee Dee, and I'll let you know if it's not coming through. Yeah. So Dee Dee's got to do a bit of adjustment on the screen here. I don't think she's got her
Okay.
Now this should work, hopefully.
All right, this should be all right. So this is from an article.
Dee Dee's got to do a bit of adjustment on the screen. Hold on, we'll just make sure that you
turn
have
the TV down. No?
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Okay.
Okay, that's it.
All
You're
right.
there now, so that's good. Okay, so all the levels hopefully are okay.
Yeah. So this is an article from FAIR, which is an organization that was established to challenge media bias, and it's been around since '86. Rania Khalek, I think, got her start in journalism with FAIR. She's worked there. They had quite a good interview on Breakthrough News the other day.
Right.
And with some of the FAIR people. Anyway, this is an article. They do look at, persistent media bias. And so they're looking at things like the anti-China agenda, the warmongering, the way all of the mainstream media kind of are in lockstep on a number of issues.
Yeah.
And this particular one is about the fact that there is media bias and censorship of the left, and when transphobes censor something about transgender people, nobody says a thing about it. That seems to be just fine. But anytime any transphobe wants to have a platform, then, oh my God, if there's any, even questioning of them, they're out there going, free speech, you're interfering with my free speech. So I'll just read some of this article because the article is very good. In an interview in the Guardian, and this was in July, and it was a good article. It made waves, not because of something it says, but because of something it didn't say. A Q&A with renowned academic Judith Butler by Vienna-based writer and scholar Jules Gleason included a scathing critique of anti-trans feminists, or exclusionary radical feminists, or TERFs, basically transphobes. Those who believe that gender is biologically determined and that transgender people's existence is a threat to women. That was later removed, and the article, or that part of the article, was later removed from the paper's website. Now, this is the Guardian, which is supposed to be, it's certainly the most left-wing of any kind of mainstream media we see in Australia.
Yeah, kind of.
I said of the mainstream media.
Sure.
It's more left-wing than the ABC or SBS these days.
Yeah, although they've given...
the Green Left Times or, the Red Flag or something might be.
Except they don't care about Julian Assange at all. That's just one of their problems. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Jezebel noted that the paper deleted an entire section of the interview on the relationship between the far right and TERFs, where Butler said that anti-gender ideology is one of the dominant strains of fascism in our time. And thus trans-exclusionary feminists who are allying with right-wing attacks on gender are not part of the political left. And Butler considers herself very left. She's anti-capitalist. She's pro-Palestinian. She's been fighting for that kind of stuff pretty much all her life. The paper took down this part of the interview, telling Jezebel that the question Gleason posed failed to take account of new facts that emerged after the interview was conducted. Gleason's original question: it seems that some within feminist movements are becoming sympathetic to these far-right campaigns. This year's furor around WeSpa in Los Angeles saw an online outrage by transphobes, followed by bloody protests organized by the Proud Boys. Can we expect this alliance to continue? Jezebel explained the Guardian's response, the new facts to which the paper... I might stop here for a minute and just say, this is not, the fact that the transphobes were organizing demonstration with the Proud Boys is not really a new thing. Here in Tasmania, when we were having the thing, they were working with the Catholic Church in order to...
Not the Proud Boys, but the far right. Not the Proud Boys.
No,
here,
the TERFs were
the TERFs, I'm sorry,
yes,
the TERFs.
Church.
Exactly.
They don't have Proud Boys here in Australia.
No, we don't have Proud Boys here. We have something else.
We have other things.
Yeah.
The Antipodean resistance.
And we have the Christian fascists, and we have
our own
a bunch of
fascists.
people, different, the brethren.
But the thing is, the TERFs will align with any kind of right-wing, like basically the Catholic Church was there pushing transphobia because, it violates their notions of morality. But, the Catholic Church is also anti-abortion, it's anti-divorce, it's patriarchal as all hell. It's certainly not a friend
It's a barrel of fun.
it's a barrel of fun. It's homophobic. You know,
Everything that Christ would have wanted them to be.
Everything Jesus would have, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they wouldn't have liked Jesus very much.
No, not really. Particularly if he was a communist.
Here, the TERFs were aligning themselves with the Australian Christian lobby, which is one of the most vehement kind of hate groups around. They are really involved in all the culture wars. They're pretty much racist. They're definitely homophobic.
And intertwined with government, just like the Christian Dominionists.
Rights. The what?
They're intertwined in many ways with government. They have a sort of a hold on some people in government, some politicians.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of Christians. I mean, basically, our Conservative Party, which is the LNP, the Liberal National Party Coalition.
Let's not get too much into Australia.
I won't get too much into the weeds.
Yeah.
But just to say that as well as our Prime Minister being an evangelical Christian who believes in the rapture and all the rest of that, Turnbull, who he replaced in a kind of upset within the party, a lot of the more secular conservatives were driven out of that party and left the Liberal National Party. What was that, about 4 years ago?
Yeah.
When Morrison took over. And it has been dominated by the Christian right since then.
Yeah, and it's only going to get worse.
And it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. Anyway, there's an election, federal election next year, and I'm sure that one of those awful, the same party's going to get in again, because that just seems to be how it goes. But anyway, I
just wanted to point out that this alliance, I mean, we've had those kind of very reactionary feminists making alliances with the Christian right around pornography, the anti-sex feminists, the anti-trans feminists, all of those sort of things have tended to make alliance with the most reactionary.
And we put feminist in quotes because exclusions like that is not feminist.
Yeah, that you stop being a feminist at that point.
Yeah. Anyway.
Because those people that you're aligning yourself with are absolutely anti-feminist.
Yeah, sure.
You know, they're against women's rights.
Yeah.
They're against reproductive rights.
Yeah.
They'd like to see women barefoot and pregnant.
They're pretty sex negative. Sex negative. They're quite sex negative.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's go.
Anyway, Jezebel explained The Guardian's response. The new facts to which the paper is referring is the arrest of Darren Aji Merriger on 5 counts of indecent exposure in connecting with the events that that transpired at WeSpa. Yet the furor to which Gleason is referring is the fact that far-right extremist groups like the Proud Boys organized at protests outside the spa, resulting in 40 arrests and the assault of one journalist with a bat, a facet of the story that has not been refuted. In fact, Glenn Greenwald put up a thing saying, "Oh, these trans rights people are incredibly violent and stuff because they were confronting somebody who was tearing up their signs and so on." And he completely ignored the fact that there was film shortly after that bit of film that he showed. There was film of the Proud Boys bashing up a journalist with a bat.
Yeah.
And he deemed that, not a problem. He was, so intent on attacking the trans rights people.
Yeah.
According to a statement Gleason provided to Jezebel after the interview's publication, editors at The Guardian suggested the interview include details of the arrest in connection to Wispa, included as a correction to the story, or look for another solution. Butler's response made no reference to the spa controversy, which involved not only whether a trans woman was behaving inappropriately at the spa, but also whether one individual's behavior was being used to impugn trans people in general. The New Republic noted how a right-wing outrage machine used its bat signal to rile up a network of culture warriors. Butler did, however, note that the anti-gender ideology movement seeks to censor gender study programs to take gender out of public education, a topic so important for the young people to discuss. So basically, Butler's discussion, which really didn't mention the Wispa thing, except to say that we can see these TERFs aligning themselves with the most right-wing fascist elements in society to attack trans people, and that this is basically a form of fascism and shouldn't be called feminism, that they have worked to censor and eliminate discussions of gender studies and take gender out of public education, something which feminists have fought for years to include, because the issues of gender are so important in actually analyzing the patriarchy. I mean, the whole essence of what a radical feminist is supposed to be is someone who's challenging the patriarchy. And you don't challenge the patriarchy if you're reaffirming the conventional roles, the conventional gender roles of society, because those roles are absolutely patriarchal. So I'll go on. A pattern of transphobic content. As Gleason told FAIR and other outlets, a correction to the piece wasn't the right response, as there was nothing factually incorrect in her question, in her answer to the question. One could even suggest that the paper's decision to cut out the question and answer makes a blanket assumption that nothing about the spa protest was transphobic. A simple solution to the emergence of new facts in the case could have been a clarifying editorial note, leaving Butler's comments to stand. Whether one agrees with Butler's comments or the assumption of the question, there's no doubt the issue could have been handled better than by simply censoring it and eliminating it. It's very irregular, and I was very surprised by the situation, Gleason told FAIR in a phone interview, noting that she was asking Butler generally about the overall convergence of gender-critical perspectives. Now, Gleason is a woman and uses she pronouns, but Butler uses they, them at this point.
Do you want me to read the next bit, Didi? Do you want me
if
to
you
read?
like.
The incident with Butler, Gleason, and The Guardian doesn't exist in isolation, as many LGBTQ activists have rung the alarm bell about the Guardian's editorial treatment of trans issues. The paper issued an editorial on the 17th of October 2018 in support of reforming the United Kingdom's Gender Recognition Act, which allows British citizens to legally change their gender. Quote, women's oppression by men has a physical basis, and to deny the relevance of biology when considering sexual inequality is a mistake, end quote, the paper argued. Do you want me to read the rest, Didi?
Yeah, no, you can read the rest of that paragraph,
Okay,
but then I want to say something about it.
Citing, as an example, quote, women's concerns about sharing dormitories or changing rooms with, quote, male-bonded, end quote, people.
Male-bodied people.
Oh, male-bonded. Male-bodied people must be taken seriously, end quote.
That's language that the TERFs use.
Yes.
Okay, now that actually is kind of a critical thing for The Guardian to be taking a position against those laws is basically, I mean, the situation in the UK was that trans people had to go through the Tavistock thing and go through a huge process to have
Can you explain the Tavistock thing, just briefly?
Tavistock was the only organization where young people could go to get any kind of recognition. They would interview them and treat them, and it was a highly medicalized situation where they would assess them to see if they were actually trans.
Yeah.
And there's been a huge thing because the number of people, of young people going to Tavistock increased drastically, but it increased from something like 2 to 64.
Yeah.
And people have said, well, look how much that increase that is by percentage. It's like increased by, 18,000 times, percent.
Yeah.
Not times, by the 18,000% or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I mean, the point was that there were still only like 64 children in all of the UK.
Yeah.
All of them had to go through Tavistock. And that's not a huge number for a population the size of the UK.
Yeah.
And because Tavistock was set up badly, with the idea that there would only be a handful of people, basically waiting lists were something like 2 or 3 years. And so people were going overseas for some sort of assessment and possibly to get blockers, puberty blockers.
Yeah.
Thank you. My
That's all right.
memory is going.
That's all right.
To get puberty blockers, and that's kind of ridiculous. And so it became a crisis. It was been beaten up by TERFs and transphobes in the UK. One of the possible solution was to move towards the measures that have been acknowledged by people, by human rights organizations globally, which is to allow people's to have their gender recognized without these medical processes.
Yeah.
And this is important in part because of the rise of non-binary people, and by the fact that most of the laws around the world were written in a way that said you can only get recognized as a different sex if you have had genital surgery and you have to be single, and in several of the Scandinavian countries you had to have been made sterile. You had to be unable to have children.
Yeah.
They can't have anybody who's trans, risk trans babies,
Trans babies, yeah.
And it's kind of hideous. Now, a lot of the Scandinavian countries have changed that, but a lot of those changes have only been in the last couple of years.
Yes.
I mean, which is disgraceful.
Yes, really.
But the medicalization of transgender stuff has been such a huge issue, and the fact that a lot of these medical procedures, the surgeries and that kind of stuff, cost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And so it became prohibitive for a lot of trans people.
Yeah.
And so one of the solutions was to just recognize that people's gender, if people are living as that gender, that they should be able to have ID, to be legally recognized as that gender.
Yeah.
And that's what those laws were about.
Yeah.
That people could have their gender, the gender that they're living, legally recognized, so that they're not automatically, as soon as you show any kind of ID, the central issue then becomes the fact that you are trans, rather than whatever else it is, whether you are a good possible employee, whether you, if you get picked up for a traffic violation, suddenly the issue becomes that you're trans, all of that kind of stuff.
Yes.
It's like, it's something that is completely pervasive when you go to rent a house, suddenly that's the thing, that is the focus, and it shouldn't be.
No.
I mean, people should be able to just rent a house.
Jesus.
Yes. I think we've spoken before that in Australia, in almost every jurisdiction, I think every jurisdiction at this point, and for many years in most jurisdiction, by many years I mean like 20 years,
yes,
we haven't had gender markers on driver's licenses.
Yes.
Yeah, your driver's license doesn't say male or female. It puts your name, your address, and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Which makes a huge difference for trans people.
Yes.
It doesn't interfere with police. The police, in fact, it makes it simpler and more straightforward. You either look like the picture on your driver's license, you look like they expect you to look, or you don't.
Yes.
And it hasn't been a problem. And it's been something that has been no problem for most people. Most people didn't even realize that was the case.
Yeah.
Because it makes zero difference for them. But for trans people, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And the best situation, you may want to go onto the site so that you can see if there's comments.
I have been, yeah.
Oh,
I do
okay.
look every so often, yeah.
Anyway, it makes a huge difference for trans people, and internationally, the UN Yogyakarta recommendations have been for many years now, for several years now, that increasingly, unless it's necessary for some reason, official papers shouldn't include gender, because there's no real reason. People are supposed to be treated equally, whether they're male, female, non-binary, whatever. Your gender shouldn't make a difference. And so there's no reason to have your gender on a driver's license. There's no reason to have your gender on most official documents. And it doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't change anybody's gender. It doesn't force, non-trans people to make any changes at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. What it does do is help intersex and trans people not have problems.
Yeah.
And, that's really excellent. And that's the best recommendations. Now, it's also been the recommendation that people, if there are any kind of gender markers on official documents, that trans people should be able to change them, basically by statutory declaration.
Yeah.
To say, this is who I am.
Yeah.
Now, that won't really impact too much. It'll impact the way trans people are treated. But it's not the case that somebody can simply, who's like a man with a beard and all that kind of stuff, can simply say, well, I'm going to change legally into a female, and therefore I get to do this, this, and this. It doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
Most official, whatever, women's shelters and that kind of stuff, certainly here in Tasmania, women's shelters have been open to trans women for many, many years.
Yes.
And they haven't had any problems. And they acknowledge and recognize that trans people are more likely to be victims of violence
Yes.
than almost anyone else.
Yes.
And certainly they're no more problematic than other women.
Yes.
And that's been the case. Yeah, and they've come out and said that.
Yeah.
When the TERFs were being particularly active here a couple of years ago.
Yes.
They made a legal statement to that effect.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent.
That's
here.
all right. That's all right.
Yeah, women's concerns about sharing drugs. I'll get back. The British thing, which is the kind of thing that J.K. Rowling was pushing against. What they were doing was actually wanting to change legal things to make trans people's lives more difficult.
Yes, as if their life isn't as difficult already.
As if their lives weren't difficult enough already.
Yeah.
To make sure that nothing was done to make it easier, and to actively make it more difficult, particularly for trans children.
Yeah.
And they've changed the law to make it very difficult to get puberty blockers, which is actually incredibly damaging.
Yes, and that is a narrative
children.
that TERFs, transphobes like to put out. They carry on about, oh, look what they're doing to the children. They're, yada, yada, they're forcing. My children says I want to be a dinosaur. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Do you want to speak to that, Dee Dee?
There's all sorts of rubbish about that.
Yeah.
I mean, here the Catholic Church put up a website. They didn't say they were the Catholic Church. They said, what was it? Tasmania for Kids or something like that.
Yeah.
And their little motto was, let kids be kids.
Yeah.
And
the way we want them to be.
In fact, it was the Catholic Church, the Catholic Women's League, the Australian Christian Lobby, and the TERFs who were in this organization.
Yeah.
And it was all about transphobia. They didn't give a shit about any kind of issue for children other than the possibility that trans children might have more rights.
Yeah.
And the thing is, trans children could only get more rights if they had supportive parents in any case.
Yeah.
But, they wanted to prevent them from getting any kind of rights, even with supportive parents.
Yeah.
And an awful lot of trans kids do not have supportive parents.
No.
Yeah.
And that's because of social pressures and also tosses like that, that sort of push that kind of ignorance and stuff. None of these people really want to get to know what the issues are about, do they, Dee Dee?
No.
It's often the case, including people like Glenn Greenwald. He doesn't ever interview a trans person. Joe Rogan never interviews a trans person.
It's that bad faith thing. It's like he did that thing about the Wee Spa thing, but he would not show the film of the Proud Boys beating up journalists and stuff, and attacking the trans rights people.
Yeah,
he didn't want to show that. That didn't exist for him.
Was that Glenn
but
Greenwald?
He will defend like J.K. Rowling and these other people. He will defend her and Abigail Shrier, excuse me, and these other transphobes who are putting out utter rubbish. He will defend their free speech to the last gasp. But when Judith Butler gets censored in The Guardian, for God's sake, not a peep.
Yeah.
Not a peep.
Yeah, not a peep from Glenn Greenwald
from Glenn
about
Greenwald or
no,
any of these
and he
other
wouldn't
people.
consider like interviewing somebody like I don't know if he's ever interviewed Judith Butler. I doubt it.
No,
but
I
that
don't.
would be somebody that he should interview if he were interested in changing his own views and also changing the views of a lot of people who follow him,
or even informing his views.
Exactly.
Not necessarily change.
Well, yes, that's right.
He may not
That's
want
a better
to change them, but
informing
you should at
himself.
least inform
Well,
yourself.
that's right. And George Galloway was is the same. He wouldn't think of interviewing somebody like Judith Butler. He'd much prefer to interview someone who's clueless or a TERF because that just backs up his already existing position.
But the thing that is really kind of disgusting in this whole free speech argument is that you talk about free speech, but Butler in her article actually talks a little bit about reification, not in that many words, but reification is where you make something into a thing, as if it's an object, and free speech is a bit like that, as if there is this thing called free speech, rather than looking at what is actually happening, who's free to do what. What are you saying? And so it is ignored that the TERFs and the transphobes have a massive platform.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about the Murdoch press here in Tasmania or in Australia and globally, and they are absolutely transphobic.
Who's that?
The Murdoch press is absolutely, vehemently transphobic.
Yeah, really.
The Guardian, this article is talking about transphobia within The Guardian.
Yeah.
Almost all of the mainstream media put out this stuff. People like J.K. Rowling, she goes, I'm being cancelled because somebody criticized her on freaking Twitter.
Yeah.
But, she's got a global platform.
Yeah.
You look at, if you're talking about free speech, you really need to look at whose opinion gets to be everywhere.
Yeah.
Particularly when there's the concentration of media we see. And the domination, the corporate domination and concentration of even things like access to the internet.
Yeah.
Where you're actually going to get viewers. I mean, it doesn't help to say, oh, well, there's alternate things. I mean, it's like you can say free speech.
Yeah.
I get to say whatever I want. Yeah, I get to say whatever I want in my lounge room.
Yeah.
I get to say whatever I want here. But that allows me to say it on YouTube. And you've got how many viewers, Trish?
What's that?
I get to say these things on YouTube.
Yeah.
And you've got how many viewers?
Yeah, 1,600 and
but I mean, it's like your channel's been suppressed massively.
Yeah.
You look at some of these other channels.
Well, I think it has. Who knows? But I think it probably has. Yeah.
Well, I would say.
Yeah.
Suddenly it just goes dead.
Yeah, sure.
It's something a number of people have noted, that a lot of people on the left or with the wrong ideas get censored. Shadow banned and that kind of stuff.
Who really knows what's going on? I can't tell anymore.
But it's certainly the case that YouTube and Twitter and Facebook are massive corporations who do exercise control over what people see.
Yeah.
It's not absolute control.
Yeah.
But, you have people who have massive platforms. You have Abigail Shrier crying that, she couldn't have ads on Amazon, even though her book was being sold on Amazon.
Yeah.
And yet she's getting interviewed by Joe Rogan and this person and that person, and it's in the news, and mainstream news reports on her, even though what she's saying is a pack of rubbish.
Yeah.
and demonstrably so. And does anybody actually question the veracity of anything she says?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No. But they make a big story about how her free speech is damaged.
Yeah. Speaking of Glenn Greenwald, though, earlier, I still don't see that he's mentioned that big bombshell of Tulsi Gabbard sort of dumping on Haitians and stuff and calling them, drug dealers and stuff, right?
Yeah.
I don't see anything. Maybe I've missed it, but I don't see anything about that.
Yeah. I don't know. We're not talking about Tulsi right now.
No, I know, but it's something I just want to keep an eye on because, it just shows another bias towards a right wing who's, she's going to be a politician again, and a right wing grifter, and I just want to see where he's going with that. I'm finding this drift to the right by a number of these so-called leftist, people to be disturbing.
Yeah.
Anyway, go back to...
Let's go on. Yeah. Some of the Guardian's own journalists saw this as an anti-trans stance, as rights groups claimed that the law would make it more complicated for trans people to transition.
Hold on a second before we go on.
This is about the English.
Hold on a second before we go on. There's comments in the...
Yeah.
Can you read it? Do you want me to increase the thing?
The problem with transgender athletics. Look, transgender athletics, if you look at that, any kind of international organization has had rules for years and years and years. Some of them have been quite abusive. Many of them have been changed as a result. A lot of them interfered with intersex people who were assigned female at birth, raised as women and so on, and they found that they were intersex and had a Y chromosome, and so they were banned from sports for a while. Some of them ended up committing suicide because they had no idea that they were in this situation.
Not committing suicide, Mama.
What?
Committing.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, they killed themselves.
Yeah.
They've gone all over the map with different things. There was the testosterone tests. Duty Chand challenged that. She's a cisgender woman, as far as I know, who happens to have high testosterone levels. She's Indian. She came from a peasant village and happened to be really fast, and they tried to exclude her or force her to take medication to lower her testosterone levels.
Yeah.
And she took it to the international court and won. Castor Semenya tried to do the similar thing and lost a couple of years later. But honestly, it's like there have been trans athletes, and the trans athletes are not winning massively everywhere. There's the famous couple of people, trans girls in Connecticut, which everybody jumps on because it's one of the few examples they can find.
Yeah.
But they lost. They won in some particular race, but they had lost to the same people who were complaining in other races.
Yeah.
You look at trans people, as somebody, one of the coaches in California said, if you look at trans athletes in sports in California, they've been there for 5-6 years, and they haven't cleaned up, they haven't won, in most cases.
Yeah.
There's very few cases where they've won. And, it's just not true.
Yeah.
It's not factually based.
Yeah. Did he?
Yeah, competitive sports are born of a culture of patriarchy and dominance. So transgender sports, well, sports aren't fair. The whole basis of sports, as one of the judges, the coaches said, is that some people are better than others. A lot of them have, longer legs or a better capacity for breathing. They have a better capacity to use oxygen, or they create less.
It's an individual thing.
Yeah,
individuals have different
lactic acid in their muscles.
Yeah,
I mean, none of it is fair.
Yeah,
and unless you're going to try and cripple people so that they are all in exactly the same situation, none of it will be fair.
Yeah.
And as Duty Chan said, yes, she has slightly higher testosterone levels, but you have she was growing up in an Indian village.
She's cisgendered, is she? Duty Chan.
She's, as far as I know, she's cisgendered.
Yeah.
She just has high testosterone levels, which happens.
Yes.
But she grew up in an Indian village, started out, doing her track things in bare feet on a dirt track.
Yeah.
And she pointed out that you've got these Americans who have these best coaches and, money out the kazoo and training from a very early age. And what's fair about that?
Yeah, sure.
There's nothing fair there.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet they want to force her to take some kind of medication to reduce her testosterone levels.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's an interesting, people looked at various women's testosterone levels, and there's a fair bit of variation. But somebody actually looked at international athletes, male international athletes, and found that there were winning, like gold medalists who were male, who had testosterone in the female range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might want to read it all out.
If we accept that none of it's fair, then why create separate leagues for men and women at all?
Didi, just indicate that it's a comment in the chat.
Yeah, it's a comment. It's a comment from
it's all right.
Whipple Dingle Weedlepuffin. If we accept that none of it's fair, then why create separate leagues for men and women at all? Right? Let's have men and women and trans all competing in equality. Yeah, look, men and women have their own competitive fields because a whole lot of reasons. The best female athletes are faster than 99.9% of men. They're competing against one another, and they compete against trans women, and the trans women don't win. In almost all cases, it's extremely rare for a trans woman to win. And to, international sports have these rules that determine who can compete. And this is for people who are assigned female at birth, many of whom may not be genetically female. The number of intersexed people in international women's sports is disproportionately higher than the normal population. But I mean, somebody who has extreme androgen insensitivity syndrome, it doesn't matter how much testosterone they have, they can't use any of it and haven't been able to do so from birth, which is why they were assigned female at birth, because they ended up with a vagina, which is why they developed as women and all that kind of stuff. Now, when they were doing genetic testing, they eliminated those people. I mean, the thing is, they've been doing that kind of testing since the 50s. International sports has been highly regulated. To sit there and claim that just on the basis that they're trans, so it's not fair, That's not looking at individual situations at all.
No.
And international sports has been looking at individual situations, and it's not right to sit there. I mean, it's basically an extreme ideological point of view, and conflates all trans people as being the same, all women as being the same, and that's not true.
Yeah.
International sports has done individual assessment for many years, and they have criteria that do get debated as more information comes to light, but it's not an ideological thing. People can't just say, I'm a woman and go compete in female sports. That's bullshit. Yeah. Okay. The sports issue also, I mean, people bring that up because it's an emotive thing, and it ignores the fact that most trans women never get involved in sports. Yeah. A lot of it is because growing up, they were often bullied as being sissies, as being feminine, unless they happen to have been those people who recognized they were trans and insisted they were girls when they were little kids.
Yeah.
Now, people like Tulsi Gabbard, talking about Tulsi Gabbard, proposed, the laws, some of the kind of things that are actually out there, but she was proposing that no school, and they're talking primary schools, elementary schools, should be able to get federal funding if they allowed trans girls to be engaged in sports, and that means PE. You're talking about a 6-year-old trans girl being able to be recognized and do PE, and you're going to say, if you do that, we will cut off your federal funding for education for the entire school. Now, what kind of coercive, awful garbage is that?
Yeah.
And yet, state after state is imposing that kind of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like they're imposing abortion bans. And this is culture war. It has nothing to do with justice. It has nothing to do with equity. It has nothing to do with fairness. It has nothing to do with recognition of human diversity. It has nothing to do with any kind of respect of human beings.
Yeah.
It's just garbage, ideologically driven, patriarchal shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see that in the media everywhere. These people like Schreier and J.K. Rowling can spread their hatred, and it's put everywhere.
Yeah.
They get interview after interview. It's in all of the newspapers, and they're claiming that their free speech is being interfered with. And you have somebody like Judith Butler, who in an interview, she's being censored in The Guardian, for fuck's sake. That's supposed to be one of the liberal good newspapers.
But that's what neoliberalism does. It cozies up with the far right. Because he'd rather do that, did than allow anything happen with communism and socialism. You know what I mean?
And you can see it. We were talking in the beginning, you can see it where these TERFs and these gender-critical whoosy-whats make their alliances with people like the Proud Boys and the Catholic Church and the evangelical Christians who the Westboro Baptist Church types.
Yeah.
Those are their allies. And they are not on the left. They are not for women's liberation.
Yeah.
They are not for feminism. To say that they called themselves trans-exclusionary radical feminists initially. Yeah. Claiming that they're radical feminists, and it's not true, because a radical feminist is someone who's against the patriarchy. And one of the most basic notions of the patriarchy is the elimination of these gender stereotypes that lock the patriarchy in. The essentialism that say women are this and men are this and nothing can change. It's all biology. No, feminism has fought for the idea that women can do anything.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll get back to this thing because it's interesting about The Guardian itself. Some of The Guardian's own journalists saw the position The Guardian took in the UK in support of their transphobic laws as an anti-trans stance, as right groups claimed the law would make it more complicated for trans people to transition and access facilities such as toilets and changing rooms. Hundreds of Guardian staffers criticized the editorial leadership generally over a pattern of transphobic content. In that context, The Guardian would appear to be not just enforcing some strict editorial standard, but taking a distinct position that there are limits on how much criticism of anti-trans politics will be allowed in the paper, particularly accusations of transphobia directed at people who see themselves on the left. My speculation would entirely be that there are some senior figures at The Guardian, Gleason said, who felt that they, quote, were being politically identified and they took objection to that, end quote. Transphobia and, quote, cancel culture, end quote. The movement for transgender rights is a major issue for critics of cancel culture who contend that expressing a viewpoint counter to the one espoused by Butler is considered so toxic as to being career-ending. Author J.K. Rowling, whose Harry Potter books have sold over 225 million copies, is often heralded as the poster child of writers who get cancelled for their transphobia. And again, when she claimed she was cancelled, that was taken up as a story and she was interviewed everywhere in the mainstream media, globally. Her view was certainly not unavailable. Conservative academic Jordan Peterson, another fucking transphobe, excuse my language, speaking out against, quote, legislation that prohibits discrimination based on gender identity or expression. Basically, he was claiming that Canadian laws that would say you can't engage in hate speech against trans people. They included trans people in the laws against hate speech. He said that would mean that anybody who misgendered somebody would get thrown in jail. A parent making a mistake, and this is the line that transphobes keep repeating, and it's rubbish, and it has never happened. Justified his stance with this, quote, free speech is not just another value, it's the foundation of Western civilization, end quote. This is a common tactic for anti-trans activists who drove around a free, quote, free speech bus, end quote, advocating gender essentialism. The takeaway being that to be offended by their position was to be offended by free expression.
Yeah.
That's like the U.S., claiming that terrorists are terrorists because they hate freedom and democracy, and totally ignoring the fact that terrorists say they are terrorists because of U.S. policies which are imperialistic. They invade countries, they bomb the shit out of them, they destroy other people's nations, they kill people, and that's why terrorists are often taking action.
Yeah.
They say that it is political and it's because of U.S. politics. But American politicians will keep saying it's because these people just hate freedom.
Yeah.
These people have never spoken out against freedom. In the world of journalism, the New York Times noted the two journalists, Katie Herzog and Jesse Singal, had either been, quote, canceled, end quote, or received, quote, scorn, end quote, for their writing on trans issues. The right-wing outlet Quillette, which is just a bog of shit and bigotry, also issued a long piece about what it is perceived as persecution of Singal. Herzog recently took heat for seeing a threat to the cisgendered lesbian population. They're coming out as non-binary or as men, reads the deck of her piece on the subject on Substack. Herzog, according to her critic, draws a direct line from disappearing lesbian bars to the extinction of lesbians themselves, even as she admits that her evidence is far from conclusive. Now, this is something that Glenn Greenwald backed up and quoted on Twitter, and he was putting up statistics that showed, how much trans people had increased, how much identification as trans had increased over the years. And he completely ignored, as many of the people who saw that post said, the fact that more people were identifying as lesbian, not less.
Yeah.
And the fact that far more people were identifying as bisexual or as non-binary or as trans didn't change the fact that more people were identifying as lesbian.
Yeah.
All it meant is that culturally, with the breakdown of some of these rigid gender norms, more people, particularly young people, feel free to say, yeah, well, maybe I'm not entirely heterosexual.
Yeah.
And that's what the increase in people identifying as bi means.
Yes.
Yeah. It doesn't mean it's taking away from the lesbian population, the people who identify as lesbian.
It's expanding the ability.
There's more people identifying as lesbian.
Yeah.
But Greenwald used those statistics and claimed that it was lesbian extinction and quoted that Herzog thing.
Look out, Dee Dee, lesbian extinction.
Lesbian extinction.
Oh, no.
And this is a line that these people take. And
Look out, Dee Dee, can you see me vanishing?
Herzog talks about the decline in lesbian bars. Well, there's a decline in bar culture.
Yes.
Increasingly young queer people tend to identify as queer. There's a breakdown of gender norms. There's a breakdown in, this strict heterosexuality, or else you have to be gay. And people feel more free to express themselves in terms of their sexuality or their gender, and do so in clubs, and do so in places where there's all kinds of genders and all kinds of sexuality.
Oh, you mean?
Dan Vicari says, my question I put to the governor of our state, how can she battle our state legislatures? There are systematic mechanisms to rail her as a scapegoat, blaming her for poor leadership. Identity causing more trouble than it solves. Butler's article is actually very interesting about identity. She talks about the fact that, I might go to that article for just a moment, because it is really quite interesting what she says about identity. The question in that interview, this is the article, this is the thing that got censored, the article that got censored.
Yeah.
Arguments around identity have become central to much of our politics these days. As someone who is skeptical of stable identity categories, what do you make of that? That was the question that was asked. She responded, I think it matters a great deal how we understand that, quote, centrality, end quote. My own political view is that identity ought not to be the foundation for politics. Alliance, coalition, and solidarity are the key terms for an expanding left. And we need to know what we are fighting against and for, and keep that focus. It is imperative that we work across differences, that we build complex accounts of social power. accounts that help us to build links among the poor, the precarious, the dispossessed, LGBTQI+ peoples, workers, and all those subjects to racism and colonial subjugation. These are not always separate groups or identities, but overlapping and interconnected forms of subjugation that oppose racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, but also capitalism and its destructions, including the destruction of the earth and indigenous ways of life. And she goes on to say, the right is seeking desperately to reclaim forms of identity that have been rightly challenged. At the same time, they tend to reduce movements for racial justice as, quote, identity politics, or to caricature movements for sexual freedom or against sexual violence as concerned only with, quote, identity, end quote. In fact, these movements are primarily concerned with redefining what justice, equality, and freedom can and should mean. In this way, they are essential to any radical democratic movement, and so we should reject these caricatures, this claim that identity politics is the problem. So what does that mean for the left? If we base our viewpoints only on particular identities, I'm not sure we can grasp the complexity of our social and economic worlds, or build the kind of analysis or alliance needed to realize ideals of radical justice, equality, and freedom. At the same time, marking identity is a way of making clear how coalitions must change to be more responsive to interlinked oppressions. And you see that in the Black radical movement. They integrate in an intersectional way many of the problems that people identify as identity politics. They integrate the fact that, trans people of color are being oppressed, women of color are being oppressed, and that oppression is separate and different and yet overlapping with the oppression of people of color as a whole. That there are these interlinked forms of oppression, and they don't just talk about Black people in terms of some sort of segregation or whatever. They talk about Black people in relation to capitalism. And you see this in things like the Black Alliance for Peace or
Black Agenda Report.
The Black Agenda Report.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it again and again in Black movements, in informed Black movements.
Yeah.
And it's an intersectional approach. And to try and collapse that and say it's identity politics does a huge disservice. And that's what she said. So please don't try and introduce that identity causing more trouble than it solves. You mean Black people should shut up? Women should shut up? Is that what you're saying? Because if that's what you're saying, it's not right.
Yeah.
And those things were what Butler was saying.
Ajama Baraka brought that up in that book by Danny Hayfong and Savent about, it's a very convenient way to kind of just, shove any minority groups to one side. You know what I mean? Any of their struggles. It was sort of interesting.
It's a convenient way to shove those groups aside.
Yeah. And it's a great sort of it's basically it's an excellent excuse, really. Anyway, Herzog recently took threat for seeing a threat to the Sukheet for seeing a threat to the cisgender lesbian population. Oh yeah, I've just read that. Do you want me to read? Oh, I don't have that.
Evoking cultural anxiety. Yeah, because my voice is getting croaky.
Oh, I see. I think hang on, just let me get to that. I think I lost the Just wait a minute. Let me open that article.
I've got it on the screen if you can.
I know, but it's hard
if
to
you
read
look.
from that screen.
Oh, yeah.
So we're up to the bit where it said...
Evoking cultural anxieties. You're in the wrong article.
Oh, am I? Oh,
Yeah.
maybe you might continue, because I
Okay.
can't... hang on. Are you reading
That's right
this?
there. You had it.
Oh, okay. Hold
Go
on.
back. The fair there. That picture is there. Evoking cultural anxiety.
Okay, I can't
If
read
you
that.
read that.
I can't read that from my screen, Dee Dee. I'm sorry.
Can't you read it on your screen?
Not from the I can. Well,
Okay,
I can't.
I can read it.
What I'm
Anyway,
yeah, go on.
outlets like Jezebel have been critical of Singal's reporting on trans youth. Libertarian writer Kathy Young lambasted the backlash on social media and in left-of-center publications against Singal and in The Atlantic. But Jezebel's Heron Walker said, his work often evokes a contradictory pair of broader cultural anxieties, that trans people are both over-medicalized, hormones and surgeries are dangerously accessible, and under-medicalized, the supposed harms of an increasing number of trans people self-identifying as trans without an official gender dysphoria diagnosis and medical intervention at the same time. And yeah, this is a pattern
I see.
in TERFs. They say, oh, anybody can claim that they're trans, without medical intervention. And they say, but the medical interventions are so dangerous, we can't allow that. And, it's been right from, the Transsexual Empire by Janice Raymond. The agenda of transphobes has been to prevent trans people from getting any kind of medical intervention.
Yeah. So you want me to read the next bit? I've got it.
Okay, yeah.
And the fact that Singal is cis does not disqualify him from covering these issues, but the success he has achieved in doing so, often posing loaded questions and answering them using misinterpreted data, while adopting the posture of some simply exploring issues no one else is brave enough to touch, has compounded the frustration I've felt while reading his work. The opportunities he has given an Atlantic cover story about trans issues, a 3-year editing stint for New York Magazine's website, a book deal with Farrar, Straus and Giroux, are unthinkable to the vast majority of trans journalists working today. Do you want me to go on?
No, I'll just say, part of the pattern of people like Joe Rogan is he'll interview somebody like Schreier, who is a notable transphobe that's been working against any kind of medical intervention being available to trans young people. Yeah. So she's actively harming trans young people and aiming it particularly at young trans women. And part of this, or assigned female at birth people, young trans masculine people.
Yeah.
And part of this is because for years the TERFs have gone after trans women, claiming that they're just men and invade bathrooms and all this bullshit.
Yeah.
And people have said, well, what are you saying? You realize there are trans men. Are you happy with trans men being treated as women and using locker rooms and stuff like that?
Yeah.
People like Buck Angel, who's bald, has a beard, he looks like a biker.
Yeah.
You're happy to have him in the ladies' change room, and you wouldn't have somebody like what you're pointing to? What
Dan has made a comment.
How invasive is medical testing at a young age? Looking for hormonal levels and chromosome DNA analysis. It isn't. Basically, medical testing at a young age hardly ever happens. I mean, part of this thing about, everybody is either male or female. Well, actually, and chromosomes
This
are
is
the
not a
only
new
real
phenomenon.
thing. What?
Trans people are not new.
People don't test chromosomes.
No, but I mean, the whole trans thing is not new. It's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
It's been in indigenous tribes.
And they don't. with young people, basically for people before puberty, best practice is if somebody is, and the normal way they do it is if somebody is insistent, persistent, and consistent. In other words, if a young kid consistently says that they are the other sex, and this is almost forced into a binary mold.
Yeah.
People who are non-binary, they don't get a hope in hell in this because they don't insist that they are the other gender.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have to consistently insist that they are the other gender. And they have to persist in spite of all kinds of objection. And they have to do it consistently. And if they do that for a number of years, then they might be allowed to socially transition. And socially transition means using the name appropriate to the gender, using whatever name you choose, and dressing appropriately. Yeah. And that's all that happens for young people before puberty. Now, when trans people hit puberty, it can be incredibly disturbing for them. And it also creates irrevocable changes. For a trans woman or trans girl in puberty, if they start growing a beard and their voice changes and their shoulders get larger and that kind of stuff, that's something that, you can, spending $10,000 or whatever, get electrolysis or something and maybe get rid of the beard. But there's nothing they will be able to do about their voice except some sort of voice therapy. There is nothing they will be able to do about the skeletal changes and so on.
Yeah.
If they get puberty blockers, all that does is delay puberty. Now, to do that, they have to have the approval of all kinds of people, basically. Their parents first and foremost.
Yeah.
And a lot of them don't have the approval. It's very difficult for them to get the approval of their parents. They also generally have to be assessed by psychologists and that kind of stuff because doctors don't want to administer puberty blockers to anyone unless they're pretty certain that and reassured by psychological professionals that this person is not going to change their mind.
Yeah.
And so they have to go through various psychological testing to see if they really are trans or are likely to be trans. And if they are, and if they have parental support, and if they have the money, and all of those ifs, then they might get puberty blockers, which will delay puberty until they're deemed to be old enough to make up their mind. And the reason they are given puberty blockers is because they will not acknowledge that trans people could know that they are trans until they are at least 16.
Yeah.
So if they're lucky, they might get puberty blockers. And that's what a lot of these laws are aiming to stop, which forces them to go through a transition. Now, for somebody assigned female at birth who is trans-masculine, that means, developing breasts, which they will have to have surgically reduced.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll have to have chest surgery. It means having narrower shoulders and wider hips, which will make it more difficult for them to ever have that be easily acknowledged as the gender that they are. And you look at people who have had puberty blockers and have transitioned later in life, and they are indistinguishable
Yes.
from somebody who grew up that way.
Yeah.
And they talk about alienation of those kids and stuff. But when those kids are able to go through to not have puberty as the wrong sex for them, then they work much better with their peer group when they are young. Yeah. They're accepted by the other girls, or they're accepted by the other boys, not so much, because boys tend to be a lot worse about enforcing gender norms and mistreating anybody who doesn't, follow the alpha male kind of whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the answer to you, Dan. I hope that helped. You want to go back and?
Yeah. Back to what?
Okay. Dan says relatives are talking and questioning how and why. Is there a comment above that? Can you go back? There's a dozen neighborhood children telling their parents they are trans in my neighborhood. Well, that may be the case. The thing is, like, who says people have to dress a certain way? One of my favorite stories, I think I've told it on this before, is this one of these mothers who, their young child, who is about 4, I think, going and shopping before they go to preschool, and the little boy said, "Oh, I love these shoes," and he brought these girls' shoes, and they were striped shoes, little striped slippers, and the mother said, those are girls' shoes. And the little boy said, "No, but I really want them. I really like them," and kept insisting. And the mother thought, well, okay. And when the boy went to go to preschool, he wanted to wear these shoes, and the mother was saying, oh, maybe you should keep them in your backpack and wear other shoes, and maybe you can take them out then, but you should have these other shoes. And the boy was very insistent. He said, "No, I really want to wear these shoes. I love them. I really want to wear them." And so she let him do it, because it was quite an issue for him. And when he came home, she went, she was worried, and she said, "How did it go? Were the kids all right with you?" And he said, "Oh, it was great. Everybody loved my shoes," and stuff. And the mother said, "Well, if you want," she thought maybe her son was actually trans, and she thought, "Oh, well, maybe, you could have other girl things too if you want." And he looked at her and he said, "I don't like these shoes because they're girls. I like them because they're striped. I love zebras, and this reminds me of zebras."
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, we put this shit on children about boys do this, and these are boys' clothes, and these are girls. They're just clothes. They're just behavior. They're just, human variation. It doesn't really matter what a kid wears. Let kids be kids. Let them play with whatever they want. Let them wear whatever they want. Let them use whatever name they want. I mean, why are we imposing these names on them?
It's just a fear.
What?
It's just patriarchal BS and fear. Fear of other. Fear of outside the binary. It's sad.
And if it's a phase or something, it'll go through. And if they're actually trans, well, that will develop. But the thing is, you don't really need to do anything, and you don't need to restrict children.
The irony is that this whole, the way society is, generally speaking, is imposing these gender stereotypes on children, but at the same time complaining about trans people or whatever, the trans agenda, trying to change. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous.
I mean,
when the desperation.
Honestly, one of the things feminism tried to do is break down these gender norms, these rigid gender norms that says, you know, men do the thinking, the math, and the engineering, and the science. Women have to do nursing and childcare and, you know, maybe psychology or that kind of thing. They do caring and nurturing. And you know, and it's ridiculous. and you know, feminists have been working for a long time to break down these gender norms.
Yeah.
And it's been working. And you look at women these days, and there's a whole lot more freedom of expression.
Yeah.
You know, and the fact that a woman wears jeans doesn't mean she's a lesbian. It doesn't mean she's butch. It doesn't mean she wants to be an auto mechanic. You know, she may be a baker, but she can wear jeans. She can wear, you know, it's just variation. It's just taste.
Yeah.
It's just preference.
Yeah.
You know, and we need to, you know, like, these gender norms are starting to break down, and there's a lot of people who can't stand that.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people are increasingly identifying as non-binary, which is seen as a kind of trans. But they don't want to fall into the one gender thing. They don't want to fall into the other gender thing. They want to be who they are.
Yeah.
And just express it. And why not?
Yeah.
You know, we have these lenses where we see all human behavior through this pink lens or blue lens. It's either male behavior or female behavior, and we need to get rid of them and see that the diversity is just human behavior.
Yeah.
You know, that men can be nurturing, that women can be assertive. That,
Yes.
you know, like, women can enjoy science. You know, there are a lot of fucking really good women scientists.
I hate it actually when they say, oh, they had feminine traits and they had masculine. What the fuck is that?
What is that?
Feminine trait. What, you know what I mean? It's like, why assign that to a certain group
I
when
know,
everybody possesses those?
Yeah, I'll tell another story of this fellow I knew who was really, really upset and came and said, I think I might be trans, you know, and I sort of said, why? And he said, well, I have all these feminine traits. You know, I feel I like doing nurturing things, and I like communicating and all of this sort of thing. I said, do you identify as a girl? And he said, well, no. I said, well, you're not trans. And he said, but what about all these feminine traits? I said, your problem is that you're calling them feminine traits.
Yeah.
That's your problem, is what you're naming them.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you feel like you are really female, well, then you're trans. If you are doing these things that are supposedly associated with women, that doesn't make you trans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stop calling them feminine.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're human. They're human traits.
Yeah.
Everybody has the ability to be compassionate, to communicate, to, you know, break down emotion, to do all of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not sure what this is, but anyway. But anyhow, other people are making...
Not Big Pharma again, Jesus God.
So
sewing is great. I wish I had applied myself more when I was young. Yeah.
That's me.
That's you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, what next, Edie, on this thing? What's the next part of this article?
Okay. Let's see. Singal, love him, hate him, or never heard of him, has hardly been cancelled. As Fair has previously noted, he and Herzog host a popular podcast that serves as a guided tour of what's upsetting the woke. He also recently reviewed the New York Times, the book Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality by Helen Joyce, an economist journalist. Joyce takes a similar tone as the Guardian stance on the Gender Recognition Act. She asserts, according to Singal, biological sex matters, that females have a right to truly sex-segregated spaces, Singal wrote in his review. The zeal for self-ID extends to trusted medical and mental health organizations too. As I was working on this review, the American Medical Association called for sex to no longer be listed on publicly available birth certificates in the U.S., which is actually an international human rights position taken up by the UN, the rights of children, the rights against torture, all kinds of groups from the UN and international human rights organizations. Since the thinking goes that unfairly impinges on people's rights to declare it for themselves, Trans is unapologetically opposed to all of this. Trans, the book. Signal gave the book a mixed review, saying that while the author's arguments are convincing, he found himself wishing for a bit more nuance, calling the book very thin on citations. Meanwhile, Butler and Gleason have had their anti-TERF views redacted by a newspaper whose editorial position stands in opposition to the now censored answer Butler gave.
Yeah.
Now, Butler takes a very nuanced position.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also takes a very strong, very left position, as you could see from those quotes that I gave you about her views on identity.
Yeah.
And the need for, the central thing for everybody to be working together for justice.
Yeah.
And communicating with each other and respecting each other and hearing that different groups have different issues and that's important to look at if we are going to work together.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then you don't end up working together.
Yeah.
Let's see. Jeffrey Ingold, one of Britain's most prominent LGBT, Butler and Gleason's censorship is hardly an isolated example. Trans advocates see anti-trans slants in corporate media in both the US and the UK all the time. Jeffrey Ingold, and from people who should know better, like Glenn Greenwald. Jeffrey Ingold, one of Britain's most prominent LGBTQ advocates, resigned from his position after what he called the tsunami of anti-trans hate, adding that trans people are facing an unprecedented, coordinated campaign of vitriol and misinformation driven by large swaths of the UK media. In the US, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, GLAAD, lambasted a piece 60 Minutes ran on laws that would limit care for transgender youth. GLAAD called it a shameful segment, fear-mongering about trans youth, promoting the false belief that young people are being rushed into medical transition. Actually, it's really difficult to get into any kind of medical transition. That's if your parents are supportive.
But it's good to put out that's one of the main kind of transphobe narratives. They're forcing all these children to,
brainwashing these children to become trans. Yeah. GLAAD also issued failing grades to several U.S. news outlets, including the New York Times and CNN, for their coverage of the Equality Act, which would offer federal anti-discrimination protection to LGBTQ people. The group said the Times coverage offered 0 quotes from the LGBT community or advocates, while generously citing inaccurate transphobic rhetoric from several elected officials without countering or contextualizing them as false. And that's one of the things, you see these people interviewing and giving huge amounts of airspace to transphobes.
Yeah.
They can put out the most outrageous bullshit, and nobody questions it.
No.
These journalists don't do any kind of journalism. They don't question any of it. They don't do any research to see if it's accurate, and they don't have a counter argument. They don't interview, people who are trans or queer advocates or any of those people, any of the people who might actually challenge any of that stuff. But as journalists, they should be challenging it themselves.
Yeah.
They should be doing some research, fair and balanced. I mean, anytime you have anybody on the left or, any queer advocate, you've got to have some hate monger on the other side getting equal time for fair and balanced.
Yeah.
If you're interviewing a hate monger, you don't need to have anybody on the other side.
No.
And you don't need to question them at all.
Yeah.
Glad pointed out that Newsweek ran a hyperbolic opinion piece against the act, stating that it would be the end of females because it was scientifically ludicrous to consider gender outside the gender binary. The magazine even dismissed intersex people as people with disorders. They're not. They're people. It's a completely natural situation. As FAIR's Justin Pilgreen argued in his survey of the Equality Act coverage, rather than hearing about the content of the bill and how it could codify millions of Americans' civil liberties and concretely impact their lives, readers were treated to largely unchallenged reprintings of the GOP's hateful and dangerous rhetoric on the issue. Using AP's coverage of the Trump administration's move to overturn protections for LGBTQ people in medical discrimination as a case study, the Daily Beast outlined how both sides' journalism fails by giving the same weight to anti-trans commentators who use faulty science as to people faulty science in contradiction to people fighting for equal rights. Anti-gender ideology. A look at conservative media gives insight into what the usual anti-gender ideology arguments are. They often involve the ideas that trans identity is an affront to biological sex and therefore to women's rights, and that anti-trans critics face public hostility. Some anti-trans right-wing media have joyously responded to the Guardian redaction. Spiked, which is a right-wing thing, used the opportunity to red bait the paper, likening it to the Soviet Union's Pravda, saying that the redaction wasn't even enough because the paper issued no apology for what it was said was a dishonestly framed question. The outlet also misgendered Gleason, a trans woman, and said she has cast iron balls for objecting to press censorship. Unheard framed Butler's views not just as distasteful, but a very physical threat to public health. So now we have queer theory, gender theory, critical race theory out in the open, and this stuff is dangerous when it metastasizes. It weakens and debilitates us. Quillette, oh God, Quillette's such a rag, also pounced on Butler's interview, saying their theory is an elite one and that they defend in an obscurationist way, while indirectly condoning censorship of their views, saying that Butler should desist from giving interviews from journalists. Yeah, she doesn't get to say anything. Transgender people are sort of like Captain Ahab's white whale for Quillette, as the publication recently ran a 3-part series on fighting so-called gender extremists because they have created an artificial reality that has gained ground thanks to extremist captures of academic, activist, and media organizations. You can see the capture of media organizations. I mean, how often did the trans activists get any kind of a platform in mainstream media?
Yeah,
And
really.
how often does any fucking transphobe get
I
it?
don't know who the hell
They get it anytime they
who are
want.
they trying to cater to, you know, by doing that shit? Like, it's,
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
yeah.
Who are they pandering to? Like, who's giving them money for them to be avoiding and censoring that sort of
The
stuff?
right wing, the Christian right, has a huge amount of money.
I mean, but isn't that
Dominionists
amazing?
and that kind of stuff
How fucking
want to
desperate.
enforce those biblic notions of patriarchy. They want, you know, you get the things like the Quiverful movement. They want to impose restrictions on women's reproductive rights. They want to prevent, like, there was one.
No, but the Guardian,
Christian
Dee Dee, you know how the Guardian, I mean, they've got lots of problems, but still.
Well, obviously, upper management is just fine. I mean, there's an awful, like it said, there were hundreds of people in the Guardian who were objecting to that policy.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not saying everybody in the Guardian is like that.
Yeah.
Clearly not.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, if upper management is forcing this editorial policy, you know.
Yeah.
Given that places like Spiked and Unheard aren't shy about defending censorship of pro-trans viewpoints or trans rights viewpoints, or attacking trans writers in gender theory, the Guardian redaction has some trans activists wondering if the rhetoric of the far-right media is bleeding into the mainstream and into newer outlets. For example, writer Nathan Tankus earlier this year quit using the popular self-publishing platform Substack over what he saw as an uptick in, quote, gender-critical, end quote, users on the site. Quote, I can't ignore that Substack is particularly benefiting from and encouraging a culture of anti-trans bigotry. Yep. Well, that's where Herzog and Greenwald and all these people are. And they're, yeah, well, it's not everybody. Gleason said of Substack and of the successes and openness of anti-trans writers, it's an institutionalizing example. You can make good enough money if you do this stuff in a certain way. It's now an established career path of its kind. Yeah, you make money if you're grifting to that kind of anti-trans shit. Butler's statements about anti-gender ideology wasn't just that it was politically reactionary, a statement that anyone is free to debate, but it's that its mission was also to stifle mere discussion that questions the gender binary. Butler's position in the case was validated when Guardian editors successfully purged it from the paper's record. Critics of cancel culture are right that free speech is a value worth preserving. Yet it's not those who promote anti-gender ideology in the mass media, like Peterson, Rowling, and Singal, whose views are shaking the foundation of free expression. Rather, the Guardian instance shows that people like Butler and Gleason have to worry about their free speech rights when speaking out. As Gleason put it, these conversations are difficult to have, and people prefer not to have them. Yeah, I mean, all the cancel culture stuff, yes, free speech is worth preserving, but it's the people who are anti-trans who are getting the big platform. It's the people who are, yeah. And a lot of it does come from the Christian right. I mean, people do not recognize that, particularly in the United States, there has been a very strong agenda among the Dominionists. The Dominionists are a particular group of evangelical Christians who have had an agenda to penetrate government at all levels, including legislature, but at all levels. They penetrate the police force, they penetrate the military with the objective of taking over and making America into a Christian state. Basically, just like Handmaid, the Handmaid's
Yeah, they're a
Tale.
scary bunch.
They want to create that kind of world
Yeah.
and say so explicitly.
Yeah.
And there's actually a lot of politicians who have been elected at this point who follow that particular ideology.
Yeah.
And you see it in the kind of laws. You see it in the attacks on reproductive rights. And it's not, trans people are low-hanging fruit. Yeah, they're an easy group. They're a very, very small group. It's more difficult for people to understand. They're almost completely powerless. And it goes against a lot of people's conditioning.
Yeah,
basically.
It shows what bullies they are too, that they pick on such a vulnerable group.
Yeah, but they're a wedge group. Beyond that, there's gay people. Beyond that, there's women's reproductive rights. Beyond that, there's women's rights to work. I mean, there are people in U.S. government who have put forward that they think it would be a good idea to have laws saying that single female parents shouldn't be allowed to teach school. Yeah, it's this kind of thing. That's when we talk about the culture war, people have to understand that it is a war, that these people are very organized.
Yeah.
And they have a hell of a lot of money. And at this point, they have a hell of a lot of power at all levels of government and in various civil institutions like the police force and the military. There's actually an organization that's been working for years to try and counter the dominionist takeover of the military. And these are people who are not opposed to the military. They're absolutely imperialists and all the rest of that, believers in the military, but they can see that this dominionist group is taking over, and they can see that the result is liable to be some sort of a coup. And it's not a mistake that Black Lives Matter and anti-war protesters get suppressed ruthlessly in the U.S. by the police and so on. And yet, something absolutely foreseeable, like that Capitol Hill riot, there was almost no police working against that. Yeah, where were they? If it had been an anti-war demonstration, a peaceful anti-war demonstration, they'd have had those troops out, in massive force.
Yeah, they wouldn't have gotten
and
even.
yet a group who wanted to invade the Capitol and prevent, actual legal processes, they were allowed in. Anyway,
You can
people
see
need
an
to
interview,
understand that
Dan.
there's actually a real...
You can see an interview about the Dominionists on the Analysis News with Paul J. on YouTube. They did one about 3 weeks ago. It's really quite scary how they're literally, these officers are basically insisting that their subordinates adopt their particular values. It's like they literally insisting. It's really, really
and thing on the analysis.
they can't push back because they're above them.
Commanding officers.
Commanding officer. So they're turning to this organization to help them, sort of help them out because it's really, really oppressive.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah.
It's full on.
It's full on.
And
people
it's serious.
Need to understand that
Chris Hedges talks about
he wrote a
in
whole
his
book
His book
And that was in
called
2007.
2007. So a lot's changed since then. American Fascists, the Christian Right, and the War on America, and it's
That goes into a lot of the Dominionist stuff.
Yeah.
But that's preceded, and it's, they're very good, have become very good at using the language of rights, of the rights of the family, of the right to religion, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and so on, and weaponize these things to use against other people. And they've been very successful at that. You can find online, at some point I'll probably do that, their instructions, advice, like books of how to use the International Convention on Human Rights in order to push their agenda. How to use that language and that kind of stuff. Anyway, just to go back to some of the thing, I mean, one of the things Butler was censored on was pointing out that these TERFs and a lot of these people who claim to be feminists and to be on the left and stuff, we see them working with the most right-wing people and basically, engaged in fascist behavior. And, you saw that in relation to women's rights earlier, where, in pushing the anti-porn line, the anti-sex worker lines, and that kind of stuff. They were saying that women need to be protected from these awful men. And this fit right into the Christian rights thing, that women need to be protected by men, and so they need, and that kind of thinking, you end up seeing it with the Taliban, ultimately. Where women need to be protected, they need to be shielded from the men's gaze with burqas and that kind of stuff. Now, if Muslim women want to wear veils, that's fine, that's their right. But where they are forced to wear that kind of thing, where they're beaten in the streets, that's not okay. And that happens. And that kind of Islam is actually something that a lot of Muslims object to very strongly.
That's Wahhabism, isn't it?
The Wahhabist, or so-called Salafi, which
How did we get onto that, Didi? I'm sorry, how did we get onto...
That these TERFs are working with those groups.
What, Wahhabists?
Well, not Wahhabists, because they're working in Western society, but they're working with the most repressive Christian right organizations who have those same kind of attitudes. That women, they have like the Quiverful movement that says women need to be married off when they're very young, because that's the best time for breeding, and have as many children as they possibly can, because that all puts arrows in the quiver for God's love. So you have to have as many children. So they marry off their girls when they're teenagers, often to older men, and move them into pushing to have child after child after child. This is a thing called the Quiverful movement. Anybody's free to go research it if you don't believe me. And it is an idea of, you get groups like the Exclusive Brethren here in Tasmania who will not let women go out and vote and things like that. They keep them protected at home from the sullying society around them.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that it feeds into. And the TERFs are working with these kind of groups.
Yeah.
To protect people.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not leftist, it's fascist.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have too much more to say. It's probably
okay.
Do you want to talk about more stuff?
No. Did you want to finish the?
That was the end of the article.
Oh, that was the end of the article. Oh, okay. You did all that at the end.
Yeah.
You did that last bit there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay then. Okay, well that's excuse me. That's pretty much it then.
Yeah.
And so anyway, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
I don't know. Does anybody have anything else they wanted to bring up?
Yeah. Anybody wants to bring up anything?
I haven't been able to see most of the comments, so I haven't been able to respond to any of them. But
yeah, I think that's probably it. So we've been on for a while now. So
Michael Whippledingle, Dan and
Holly?
Everybody, lovely to see you, Holly.
Yeah.
I hope you're still there, Holly. Is Holly still there? There was a comment she made just up a little ways.
And Jared R. read the comments on the Fair article. Yeah, so you just came in the last minute. Nice to see you. And so anyway, we might sign off unless somebody has some comments they want to make or maybe some questions.
Yeah.
I didn't really do anything, Whipple-dingle, but Dee Dee's the one that knows how to talk about this, but thanks for that. Yeah.
Jared, comments, I don't know what the comments are. I haven't read them. I tend to avoid the comments in a lot of this thing because it's fertile ground for trolls and haters. Maybe there's some good comments in there.
It's all right. It's all right.
Yeah.
Even the, it can all lead to different things. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll say goodbye now. So thanks so much for watching.
Thank you,
and Dee Dee's going to sign off.
Everybody for coming.
Yeah, and I'll be probably posting something tomorrow, which I think is really important about the debate arena that the left is getting involved in. That is actually, in some ways, unintentionally helping people move into fascism. It's a sort of a really interesting discussion that happened on Luna Oi's partner, American, I can't remember his last name now, has a site called Non-Compete, and they had a discussion with about 4 different people, and I picked out various bits of that discussion, which sort of is something that I've been concerned about too, all these different debates that actually are probably not really doing the left any good and helping actually normalize right-wing talking points. So anyway, that's something that I might post tomorrow, or we may even do another live and talk about it. So one or the other. It'll be in the next couple of days. So thanks so much for watching, and you're watching Faint Signals for Vega from Dee Dee River and myself, Tricia Roberts. We'll say good night.
I'll leave you with a picture of Jupiter's moon.
Yeah, isn't this a great
picture? Which is fabulous.
It's fantastic. It looks like a abstract painting. It's actually supposedly Jupiter's moon. So
like an impressionist painting. Yeah.
Anyway, I'll let you turn us off, Dee Dee.
Okay.
Bye for now. Much love
again, everybody. Yeah.
Much love.
Jared,
bye for now.
I believe they were all against the article. I mean, anytime there was anything positive to say when we were having the marriage equality debate,
Jared.
comments were just full of hate and garbage and stuff. Comments are awful often. I tend not to want to read them. Okay then. Well, see you, everybody. Have a good evening. Happy equinox for yesterday.
Yeah.
And I hope you have a lovely coming season and year.
Okay, Didi,
whether you're
don't
moving
take
into
too
the
long.
light or moving into the dark.
Moving into the light or the dark. Come on,
Yeah.
let's
Okay.
wrap it up. Okay, then bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.